Hey,
Uh,
Paul.
hey, Jeff, how are you today?
I am good. I guess I should say I am Jeff Jolton, and you are Paul Mastrangelo. We are here on the Friday 15, right? I think
I guess you should say that because what if someone has never watched this before and they have no idea and they can't read
they
the.
can't read exactly. So here we are. I just was, always excited to talk to you. We have 15 minutes. And so one of the things I've heard you ramble on about, Paul, in the past is the role of personality or the value of personality in helping organizations change. And I really was thinking about this a little bit myself and wondered, like, if you could restate, give me a little bit of an elevator speech as to why you think personality can play or should play an important role in driving org change.
Yeah, I happen to have some material that I can share with you about
Oh
that.
my
Isn't that a
God.
coincidence?
It's just like you almost came prepared.
Oh, well, almost, almost. So, just to start off, yeah, I think one of the number one things that I would say is for an organizational change, a leader wants to involve employees. You got to get employees involved. And one of the major techniques that I am a fan of is using a peer nominated team. So when I try to get leaders to think about, well, okay, there are going to be people nominated, but you've still got to make some selections. And I try to give them an idea or a persona of what the right type of person would be to sort of add in or be open to change and then to lead change. And to me, that's the number one thing is, can we actually have someone who wants to change but is also going to lead others? So as a starter into that explanation, this is probably too small to be viewable on screen, but there are the big five, right? And most of our audience will be familiar with that. But in case you're not, typically folks will think about openness, extroversion, agreeableness, stability, and conscientiousness are five ways that people describe each other. I don't think that our personalities are locked in for life. I think that they tend to drift a little bit over time, and I think we can intentionally change them. So I'm not saying that this is like in your DNA or is tattooed on you, but I would say that it is possible that people are more open, or some people are more open than others. They're thinking about the future, they're imaginative, they're curious, they're more ready to jump on something new than to hold on. And other folks are going to hold on. They value, this is what's currently working. We need to hold on to that. So that's one of the major personality domains. Extroversion is one that we know as well. And let me just say this at this moment, a lot of how we define these big five has been tainted a little bit by some less scientific definitions. Some of the research that's out there now would say, hey, you know what extroversion really is? It's people who are assertive and enthusiastic. And those are two sort of breakouts. Exactly. Right. So, I need someone who's going to be open to new experiences, who's going to be a little bit assertive about that so that when faced with a challenge from other people, he or she is going to really stand up to that. And maybe when it comes to agreeableness, right, someone who's a little too polite or too compassionate would rather just avoid a conflict. We need someone who's at least in the middle there, someone who's like, well, sometimes there needs to be conflict. So I can piece that together and say, if you're highly open and then you're highly extroverted, and then you have sort of a little bit of drift in you, you're kind of in the middle with agreeableness, that's a persona that I would want for someone who's going to rail against what we have been doing and help lead a change going in the different direction. So I'm going to pause there and let you respond.
So I I see what you're saying, and I think there's an intuition to that what you're saying, but I think that matching personality to change is comforting, but I don't think it's necessarily predictive, right? It Personality is almost just really kind of getting at preferences, and it doesn't really get at truly at performance.
Oh, did you just say a Myers Briggs term?
Well, I shouldn't say Myers-Briggs preference, right? But I'm sorry, they do conflate. But I do think that we do talk about in our world here, Spencer Stewart. We do talk about people have things, styles, and things that are dominant, right? And it's a certain element, but it doesn't mean that it's locked in and it's the only way that they do things. And so that's where my element of preference came from. So I don't mean to evoke the dreaded MBTI, but the reason I bring that up is that I do think great leaders are able to flex. I mean, that's part of what makes them flexible, that they're self aware that they sometimes are reticent or more introverted, and that they are in situations where they need to rally the troops or they need to think more broadly, and they are able to do that, and knowing that they have to be flexible, but then also recognizing situations where their natural state can be a benefit. There are situations in a change environment where holding back and evaluating and being a little bit more quiet, or maybe not being distracted by the next shiny thing, is beneficial to change. So I just want to be careful that we don't think that there's a one size fits all, and that this magic mix of personality is a recipe for change success, because I think it's the recipe for change success is actually one of flexibility and adaptability, rather than thinking that this is the only way that we move forward.
Yeah, no, I think you have some valid points. One of the research articles that's come out recently, and I'll pop this on our stage here as well. It's almost word for word what you said. There was some research that came out that said if you think about personality, and when they talked about personality, they said, you know what? Just think about behaviors. So people who are, score highly on extroversion, score highly on openness, they have what I would call default behaviors. And I think that's what you meant by preferences. What I would say is when people are stressed or when they're tired, they kind of go back to their default, right? It's what comes a little bit more naturally to them. And that can be, as you said, that can get you in trouble sometimes, or it can be just what the situation calls for. And that's what this article talks about. In general, you can think about, hey, when people feel unsafe, you as a leader need to be creating some emotional contagion about even tempered. We're going to be okay. Let's talk about like calming down and taking a breath and thinking about what we have to do. If we're in a situation of change where the old way is no longer working, that's when you do want to get open people's minds. Let's think about this not as a threat. Let's think about just as information. Let's experiment with some things. Let's try something different. Again, classic behaviors of someone who would be high on openness. And then same thing for if you have fragile coordination, maybe a merger acquisition, then leaning into highly agreeable, highly conscientious, right? So it's about trust, it's about setting expectations, and it's about being open and honest about some of the conflicts. And then, of course, if there's an opportunity for your organization, again, there might be a combination of behaviors where you're like, hey, I'm going to go out there and be visible. We're going to talk about something new. We're going to create a great vision. Now, to your point, when you treat it that way, it's almost like you could take personality right out of the conversation and just say, these are behaviors that make sense in a certain situation. So to your point, I've got to recognize what the situation is. I've got to know something about my own default behavior. Am I naturally falling into what I need to do here? Oh, no, I'm not. This is not what in that case, I'm going to have to build those muscles. I have to focus a little bit more to make sure I'm kind of intentionally doing something that doesn't always come naturally. So in that sense, do I think personality assessment, know thyself, can maybe work in trying to get you here? I feel like the answer is yes. Does that softer position make you feel any better, Jeff?
I mean, a little bit, like, right, because I like personality doesn't create change in the organization, but behavior does. So, I, I'm much happier there. I would also say knowing what you're doing and actually what we do, right? It's if we were to say that only certain personalities create change, then why would we do change development workshops, right? There would be no benefit to it because it would say, well, only these leaders are capable of instituting change. And so that isn't the case. We would be able to say every leader has that potential if they learn, as you point out, these particular behaviors. So again, I think the magic isn't that you need to have a particular behavior. It's what can we learn from different behavior, from different personalities that can help and influence good or change. And in that case, it's sort of like what can extroversion serve change? What could introversion serve and change? What could openness serve and change? And to give you credit, I would say there is, I know, I not too much. Don't let go to your head. I can see it swelling already. So it's
You like me. You really like me.
oh gee, like no, don't just. I'm gonna regret this for hours. But anyway, the fact that extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, like those have more in many ways to offer in the most typical change situations than not. Now,
Yeah.
there are atypical scenarios where maybe they can be distractions. And then again, it's knowing the situation, which is good leadership. It's not to go into every situation and think it's just like everything else. And that is, again, as I said, knowing how to flex, knowing how to read the situation, it better than any personality type can serve your change dynamic, in my opinion.
No, no, no. I'm with you 100% there. And it was interesting coming off doing a executive assessment and development session last week, and this is where we're drifting into a slightly different topic, but this was where the pop psychology world really was interfering with what we were trying to do. I think we use the Neo. The Neo is an instrument that was developed and really at the forefront of the Big Five movement. And there are others out there. I'm not going to list them all, but I mean, like the Hogan, I think, has got a lot of research behind it, et cetera. And there are others that are not as well researched. We're not seeing high reliability, validity for things like the DISC, for the Myers Briggs, et cetera. And so, you know, one of the things that I started realizing was I can be someone who is again really open in a situation where we need openness. So again, let me translate that, right? I am someone who's thinking, look, I want to put forward experimentation. I want to model an idea of we can't be scared of everything. We've got to think about opportunities, right? So I want to do that. However, if I'm someone who is not very assertive, if I'm someone who doesn't really speak up and sort of exert that, then all of my all of the behavioral defaults that would be going in the right direction of what we need are relatively hidden. And I realized, wow, so extroversion becomes almost like an amplifier. If I'm someone who is more assertive and more enthusiastic, you know where I stand. And that's not the same thing as someone who's the life of the party or charismatic. That's a different, yeah, no, okay, Jeff. Well, you are always the life of the party, my friend. Well,
Well,
the problem, Jeff, is that I want to desperately gong the gong, but apparently I've lost it on this. Did you take over my gong
I
role?
did. I stole the gong and took it, and so that could truly be the life of the party. So even though I am not really the extrovert, but now I'm able to change. I mean, really, like if extroversion was all you need to be a great change agent, then every extrovert, and we know that ain't the case. But that's
Necessarily so.
all we have to say on that for this week. But it is an interesting conversation. Certainly more to talk about how I think personality gets over amplified, and yet there is value to it as well. So maybe we'll talk about that another time. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Enjoy the sunshine while it lasts.
Yes. I hope spring is sprung wherever you are. Take care. Have a good one, folks.
Cheers. Bye bye.